Tonight we begin with a document that was never meant to be analyzed this closely. A doctor's note that White House officials believed would silence the critics, a note that was supposed to end the conversation about President Trump's health once and for all. Instead, it started a new one. A conversation that has medical professionals across the country raising alarms about what was written, alarms about what was omitted, and alarms about what this note reveals about the president's true condition. And to understand why physicians are so concerned, why neurologists and radiologists speaking to multiple outlets are using words like unprecedented and deeply troubling, you need to understand what a proper medical disclosure looks like, because this isn't about politics, this isn't about partisan attacks, this is about medical documentation standards that exist for a reason, standards that every physician learns in medical school, standards that, according to experts who have reviewed this note, were not followed. More than a dozen board-certified physicians have now gone on record, some by name, others speaking on condition of anonymity due to professional concerns, expressing serious reservations about what they saw in this document, not what they expected to see, what they actually saw, and more importantly, what they didn't see. Because in medicine, what's missing often tells you more than what's present. The tests not mentioned, the values not included, the specific language choices that trained eyes recognize immediately. And what these trained eyes are seeing has them deeply, genuinely alarmed. Now, when the White House released this documentation, they did so with confidence. The messaging was clear. The president is healthy. The MRI was clean. There's nothing to see here. And for most Americans without medical training, Americans who trust that official documents tell the whole truth, that messaging worked, at least initially. But within hours, something started happening on medical social media. Physicians began posting. Neurologists began commenting, radiologists, who spend their careers reading brain scans, began asking questions. Questions that weren't being asked on cable news, questions that weren't being raised in White House press briefings, questions that only those with specialized training would even think to ask. And those questions, according to sources in the medical community, have not been answered. The White House has remained silent. The physician who signed the note has not given interviews. The detailed data that would normally accompany such a disclosure has not been released. Silence, strategic, deliberate silence, and in medicine, when doctors go quiet after a disclosure, it means there's something they don't want to discuss. So what exactly are these red flags? What are medical professionals seeing that the rest of us missed? Let's go through them one by one, because the details matter. And what experts have identified is nothing short of extraordinary. Red flag number one, the language itself. According to neurologists who have reviewed the note, the phrasing used is highly unusual. Medical documentation follows specific conventions, specific terminology, specific ways of describing findings that have been standardized across the profession. This note, experts say, deviates from those conventions in ways that raise immediate questions. The word choices, the sentence structure, the way certain findings are described and others are conspicuously not described. One neurologist, speaking to a medical outlet on condition of anonymity, put it bluntly, this reads like it was written for public relations, not for medical accuracy. Red flag number two, what's missing? In a standard neurological evaluation, particularly one involving MRI imaging of a patient in their late 70s, certain measurements are always included: brain volume assessments, white matter analysis, specific markers that indicate cognitive health or decline. According to radiologists who reviewed the public documentation, these standard elements are absent, not mentioned, not referenced, simply not there. Why would a physician omit standard measurements? Why would information that should be routine simply not appear? Sources in the medical community say there are only two explanations. Either the tests weren't done, which would be a significant deviation from standard care, or the tests were done and the results weren't something the White House wanted to share. Neither explanation is reassuring. Red flag number three, the physician's credentials. Now let's be clear, the doctor who signed this note is a licensed physician. That's not in dispute. But medical experts speaking to multiple outlets have raised questions about specialization. Neurological evaluations, according to board-certified neurologists, should be conducted and documented by physicians with specific training in neurology. The credentials listed on this note, experts say, raise questions about whether the appropriate specialist was involved. Was a board-certified neurologist consulted? Did a specialized neuroradiologist review the MRI images? These are standard questions for this type of evaluation, and according to experts, the documentation doesn't answer them. Red flag number 4, the timeline. Sources familiar with standard medical procedures say that comprehensive neurological evaluations take time. The imaging itself, the analysis, the documentation, the review process, the timeline described by the White House, according to these sources, is unusually compressed, faster than normal, faster than thorough, that raises questions. Was this evaluation comprehensive? Were all standard protocols followed? Or was speed prioritized over thoroughness? And red flag number 5, the one that has medical professionals most concerned, the specific conditions that were ruled out. In standard neurological documentation, physicians typically note not just what they found, but what they specifically excluded: common conditions, age-related concerns. The differential diagnosis that demonstrates a thorough evaluation was conducted. This note, according to experts, doesn't do that. It makes positive claims without the corresponding exclusions that would give those claims credibility. And in neurology, that's not just unusual, that's alarming. So what are medical professionals doing with this information? How is the expert community responding? The reaction, sources say, has been swift and unprecedented. Within 48 hours of the document's release, medical Twitter, now known as Medical X, exploded with analysis. Physicians who normally stay out of political discussions found themselves unable to remain silent. Thread after thread, analysis after analysis, board certified. Doctors explaining to their followers exactly what they were seeing and why it concerned them. And it wasn't partisan. According to those tracking the response, physicians across the political spectrum, doctors who voted for Trump, doctors who voted against him, were raising the same concerns. Because this isn't about politics. This is about medical standards. Standards that exist to protect patients. Standards that exist to ensure accurate information. Standards that, according to these experts, were not followed. Medical organizations have begun internal discussions. According to sources familiar with these conversations, professional bodies are debating whether to issue formal statements, whether to demand additional disclosure, whether to use their institutional authority to push for transparency. That hasn't happened yet. But the fact that it is being discussed, the fact that professional medical organizations are even considering that step, tells you how serious the concerns are. Meanwhile, the White House has responded with dismissal, calling the questions politically motivated, calling the concerned physicians partisan actors, attacking the messengers rather than addressing the message. But according to sources close to the medical community, that response isn't working, because these aren't politicians raising concerns. These aren't cable news hosts looking for ratings. These are doctors, physicians who took an oath, professionals whose entire careers are built on accurate medical assessment, and they're not backing down. So what does this actually mean? If these red flags are legitimate, if the concerns being raised by medical professionals are valid, what are the implications? Let's start with what we know. We know that President Trump is in his late 70s. We know that cognitive decline is a statistical reality for individuals in that age group. We know that the American public has a legitimate interest in understanding the health of their president. We also know that previous administrations of both parties have faced questions about presidential health. And we know that transparency historically has been the standard that Americans expect. What we're seeing now, according to political analysts and medical ethicists speaking to multiple outlets, is a departure from that standard. A departure that raises questions not just about health, but about honesty. Because here's what medical professionals are really asking: if the president is healthy, why isn't the documentation thorough? If there's nothing to hide, why are standard elements missing? If the evaluation was comprehensive, why doesn't the note reflect that? These aren't unreasonable questions. These aren't partisan attacks. These are the basic inquiries that any trained physician would make when reviewing incomplete documentation. And the silence from the White House, the refusal to provide additional detail, the attacks on those raising concerns, that silence speaks volumes. According to sources familiar with medical communications, there's a pattern here. When health news is good, institutions share it widely, they provide detail, they welcome questions, they use transparency as evidence of confidence. When health news is concerning, institutions do the opposite. They minimize disclosure, they attack questioners, they hope the story goes away. Which pattern are we seeing here? Medical professionals speaking to multiple outlets say the answer is obvious and deeply troubling. Cognitive concerns 16-0019-00 now. Let's address directly what many experts are suggesting, but few are willing to say openly. The red flags in this documentation, according to neurologists who have reviewed it, are consistent with an effort to obscure early-stage cognitive concerns. Let me be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean we have a diagnosis. It doesn't mean we know with certainty what's happening. It doesn't mean medical professionals are claiming to have information they don't have. What it means is this: the pattern of disclosure, what's included, what's excluded. How it's presented matches what experts would expect to see if there were findings that warranted concern, the missing measurements, the unusual language, the compressed timeline, the absence of specialist credentials, the failure to rule out specific conditions. All of it, according to neurologists speaking on background, tells a story the White House doesn't want told. And the implications of that story are profound. The President of the United States makes decisions that affect the entire world. Military decisions, economic decisions, diplomatic decisions that could mean war or peace. The American people have a fundamental right to know whether the individual making those decisions is cognitively capable of doing so. That's not partisan, that's not an attack, that's democracy. And right now, according to the medical professionals raising these concerns, that right is being denied. So what happens now? What should Americans be watching for? And what can be done to get answers? First, watch for independent medical demands. According to sources in the medical community, discussions are already underway about formal calls for transparency. Professional organizations, medical ethics boards, groups with the credibility and authority to demand what the public cannot. If those demands materialize, if institutional medicine takes a formal position that changes the political calculus significantly. Second, watch for additional documentation. The pressure is building. Every day that passes without additional transparency is a day the questions grow louder. According to political analysts, the White House will eventually have to respond with more than attacks and dismissals. When they do, if they do, examine that documentation carefully. Look for the elements that were missing the first time. Look for the specialist credentials. Look for the comprehensive assessments. And if those elements are still missing, that tells you everything you need to know. Third, watch the president himself. Medical professionals speaking to multiple outlets say that cognitive concerns, if present, typically manifest in observable ways. Speech patterns, word-finding difficulties, confusion under pressure, behavioral changes. These are things the public can observe. These are things that don't require access to medical records. These are things that, according to experts, Americans should be paying attention to, not to attack, not to mock, but to assess, to evaluate. Whether their president is capable of the job they elected him to do, because that's not just a right, that's a responsibility. More than a dozen medical professionals have now raised alarms about this documentation, board-certified physicians, neurologists, radiologists, experts whose careers depend on accurate medical assessment. They're not doing this for politics. They're not doing this for attention. They're doing this because they took an oath to protect patients, an oath to ensure accurate information, an oath that they believe requires them to speak when they see something wrong, and they're seeing something wrong. The red flags are there. The missing information is documented. The questions are legitimate. The only thing missing now is answers. Answers that the White House refuses to provide, answers that the American people deserve, answers that, one way or another, will eventually come out. Because in medicine, as in politics, the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how hard powerful people try to hide it. The question is whether it emerges in time. If you believe Americans deserve transparency about their president's health, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single update as this story develops. Drop a comment below. Do you think the White House should release the full medical records? What are you seeing that concerns you? And share this video. Share it with everyone who needs to understand what medical professionals are saying, because the mainstream media isn't covering this. They're not asking these questions. We are, and we need your help to get this information out. We'll see you tomorrow.